Good afternoon. Good afternoon. Good. I'm Major Jackson, here to introduce Tracy K. Smith. And on behalf of my colleagues in the English department at the University of Vermont, we are very happy to collaborate once again with the Burlington Book Festival. I also want to thank the Harbor Press publishers for co-sponsoring the Grace Paley Poetry Series. I believe to be a poet, one must possess the following. One, a fervent belief in language to represent, illuminate, and reinvent one's life. But also, two, that language will build a bridge to a reader waiting faithfully for your intimate, open, and unguarded voice. Two, a courageousness and fidelity to tackle head-on, maybe more importantly, imaginatively, in one's poems, the heartbreaking and human struggles that give one's life its unique heft, meaning, and if properly rendered, its grace. Three, a hard-edged discipline. This does not mean necessarily writing every day in some regimented fashion, but it does mean exercising daily an observation of the world that is all-filled. Such stamina of seeing that I recognize in Tracy K. Smith's discursive, imaginative, language-centered poetry. This seeing leads us to such lines in her poems as the following: "The future isn't what it used to be. Even Bowie thirsts for something good and cold. Jets blink across the sky like migratory souls." Or, "Sometimes what I see in a library is a library in a rural community, all the tall shelves in the big open room, and the pencils in a cup at circulation, gnawed on by the entire population." That's the work of the poet, who can see those cups of pencils and evoke them in our minds as if they were again before us. Tracy K. Smith received degrees in English and creative writing from Harvard College and Columbia University, and was a Wallace Stegner Fellow in poetry at Stanford. She is the author of 3 books, Life on Mars, Duende, and The Body's Question. She is the recipient of a Cave Canem Poetry Prize, a Rona Jaffe Award, a Whiting Award, and a James Laughlin Award from the Academy of American Poets. For 2 years, she was selected to participate in the Rolex Mentor and Protege Arts Initiative. She has taught at City University of New York, University of Pittsburgh, and Columbia University. However, since 2008, she has been an assistant professor of creative writing in the Lewis Center for the Arts at Princeton University, and recently a member of Middlebury's Bread Loaf School of English in Ripon, Vermont. And thus, for 6 weeks of the year, we can count her as our neighbor. Please give a warm welcome to Tracy K. Smith.
Thank you. Whenever you get introduced like that, it gives you such a good feeling, and then when you realize it's time to come up to the podium, it grips you with fear. I don't want to prove him to be a liar. So I'll try and live up to that version of myself. It is such a pleasure to be here in Vermont. It's one of my favorite states, and I think that what I, as a New Yorker, perceive as the quiet and the expansiveness of here does something to unlock the unconscious, and I think that's the place where poems live. So thank you for having me. People have been coming up to me today asking if I was the space poet or the outer space poet, and I love that. I don't have a deep knowledge of science, but I was very interested in thinking about the universe and using the genre of science fiction as ways of considering public life and private experience and the idea of America. and what characterizes a place like this. And so I was writing poems in that direction quite happily, watching a lot of old science fiction movies again. And my father became ill quite unexpectedly and passed away. And it was then that the sense of the mystery and the vastness and the loneliness of space really helped me to come up with a shape for the grief that I was feeling. And so you'll hear those different kinds of tendencies at work in these poems. The weather in space. Is God being or pure force? The wind or what commands it? When our lives slow and we can hold all that we love, it sprawls in our laps like a gangly doll. When the storm kicks up and nothing is ours, we go chasing after all we're certain to lose. So alive, faces radiant with panic. Maybe I'll just follow that path. God kept appearing in these poems, and it wasn't really intentional, but I didn't really try and chase him out. And I think one reason for that was I've mentioned grief, but I was also trying to figure out what I wanted or needed God to be, because I knew that the version of God I'd been handed as a child felt too small, and maybe space was also something that invited a kind of enlarging of that figure. So I'll read a couple of poems that utilize God as a character. Cathedral kitsch. Does God love gold? Does he shine back at himself from walls like these, leafed in the earth's softest wealth? Women light candles, pray into their fistful of beads. Cameras spit human light into the vast, holy dark, and what glistens back is high up and cold. I feel man here, the same wish that named the planets. Man with his shoes and tools, his insistence to prove we exist, just like God, in the large and the small, the great and the frayed, in the chords that rise from the tall brass pipes, and the chorus of crushed cans someone drags over cobbles in the secular street. And this is a poem called It and Company. I think it is God's cousin in this book or something. It and Company. We are a part of it, not guests. Is it us or what contains us? How can it be anything but an idea, something teetering on the spine of the number I? It is elegant but coy. It avoids the blunt ends of our fingers as we point. We have gone looking for it everywhere, in Bibles and bandwidth, blooming like a wound from the ocean floor. Still, it resists the matter of false versus real. Unconvinced by our zeal, it is unappeasable. It is like some novels, vast and unreadable. Major quoted a little bit from a poem called My God, It's Full of Stars. And I'll read it. I'll see if I feel like skipping around in it once I get started. You might recognize that line as a quote from Arthur C. Clarke's novel version of 2001. And it's also the opening line of the sequel to that film, 2010 or 2010, I guess it's called. And you'll just see there's some other film stuff in here. My God, it's full of stars. We like to think of it as parallel to what we know, only bigger. One man against the authorities, or one man against a city of zombies. One man who is not, in fact, a man, sent to understand the caravan of men now chasing him like red ants let loose down the pants of America. Man on the run, man with a ship to catch, a payload to drop, this message going out to all of space. Though maybe it's more like life below the sea, silent, buoyant, bizarrely benign, relics of an outmoded design. Some like to imagine a cosmic mother watching through a spray of stars, mouthing, yes, yes, as we toddle toward the light, biting her lip if we teeter at some ledge. Longing to sweep us to her breast, she hopes for the best, while the father storms through adjacent rooms, ranting with the force of kingdom come, not caring anymore what might snap us in its jaw. Sometimes what I see is a library in a rural community, all the tall shelves in the big open room, and the pencils in a cup at circulation, gnawed on by the entire population. The books have lived here all along, belonging for weeks at a time to one or another in the brief sequence of family names, speaking, at night mostly, to a face, a pair of eyes, the most remarkable lies. Charlton Heston is waiting to be let in. He asked once, politely, a second time with force from the diaphragm. The third time, he did it like Moses, arms raised high, face an apocryphal white. Shirt crisp, suit trim, he stoops a little, coming in, then grows tall. He scans the room. He stands until I gesture, then he sits. Birds commence their evening chatter. Someone fires charcoals out below. He'll take a whiskey if I have it, water if I don't. I ask him to start from the beginning, but he goes only halfway back. That was the future once, he says, before the world went upside down. Hero, survivor, God's right-hand man. I know he sees the blank surface of the moon, where I see a language built from brick and bone. He sits straight in his seat, takes a long, slow, high thespian breath, then lets it go. For all I know, I was the last true man on this earth. And may I smoke? The voices outside soften. Planes jet past, heading off or back. Someone cries that she does not want to go to bed, footsteps overhead. A fountain in the neighbor's yard babbles to itself, and the night air lifts the sound indoors. It was another time, he says, picking up again. We were pioneers. Will you fight to stay alive here, riding the earth toward God knows where? I think of Atlantis, buried under ice, gone one day from sight, the shore from which it rose now glacial and stark. Our eyes adjust to the dark. Perhaps the great error is believing we're alone, that the others have come and gone, a momentary blip, when all along space might be chock full of traffic, bursting at the seams with energy we neither feel nor see, flush against us, living, dying, deciding, setting solid feet down on planets everywhere, bowing to the great stars that command, pitching stones at whatever are their moons. They live wondering if they are the only ones, knowing only the wish to know, and the great black distance we flicker in. Maybe the dead know, their eyes widening at last, seeing the high beams of 1,000,000 galaxies flick on at twilight, hearing the engines flare, the horns not letting up, the frenzy of being. I want it to be one notch below bedlam, like a radio without a dial, wide open so everything floods in at once, and sealed tight so nothing escapes, not even time, which should curl in on itself and loop around like smoke, so that I might be sitting now beside my father as he raises a lit match to the bowl of his pipe for the first time in the winter of 1959. Oh, I did a reading this week with an artist who has taken 100 photographs and had them, I guess, like somehow seared onto a gold disc that's been affixed to the side of a satellite that's going to be launched into space anytime now. And so he calls these the last pictures. His name is Trevor Peglin, and these are the last pictures that ostensibly this satellite is going to be orbiting the Earth for the next 3 billion years. So it made me think of a poem I wrote called The Museum of Obsolescence. So much we once coveted, so much that would have saved us, but lived instead its own quick span, returning to uselessness with the mute acquiescence of shed skin. It watches us watch it, our faulty eyes, our telltale heat, hearts ticking through our shirts. We're here to titter at the gym cracks, the naive tools, the replicas of replicas stacked like bricks. There's green money and oil in drums, pots of honey pilfered from a tomb, books recounting the wars, maps of fizzled stars. In the south wing, there's a small room where a living man sits on display. Ask, and he'll describe the old beliefs. If you laugh, he'll lower his head to his hands and sigh. When he dies, they'll replace him with a video looping on ad infinitum. Special installations come and go. Love was up for a season, followed by illness, concepts difficult to grasp. The last thing you see, after a mirror, someone's idea of a joke, is an image of the old planet taken from space. Outside, vendors hawk t-shirts, 3 for $8. I'll shift gears. There's a sequence of elegies in the middle of the book for my father, and I'll just read a couple of those. The sequence is called The Speed of Belief. I didn't want to wait on my knees in a room made quiet by waiting, a room where we'd listen for the rise of breath, the burble in his throat. I didn't want the orchids or the trays of food meant to fortify that silence, or to pray for him to stay, or to go then finally toward that ecstatic light. I didn't want to believe what we believe in those rooms, that we are blessed, letting go, letting someone, anyone, drag open the drapes and heave us back into our blinding, bright lives. This is a guzzle. I have my students write guzzles every semester, and this is the first one that I wrote, partially out of guilt at the fact that they were doing this, and I was just watching them. You'll hear there's a pattern of repetition that you might hear. What does the storm set free? Spirits stripped of flesh on their slow walk. The poor in cities learn, when there is no place to lie down, walk. At night, the streets are minefields. Only sirens drown out the cries. If you're being followed, hang on to yourself and run. No, walk. I wandered through evenings of lit windows, laughter inside walls, the soul steps amid street lamps, errant stars. Nothing else below walked. When we believed in the underworld, we buried fortunes for our dead. low country of dogs and servants, where ghosts in gold-stitched robes walk. Old loves turn up in dreams, still livid at every slight. Show them out. This bed is full. Our limbs tangle in sleep, but our shadows walk. Perhaps one day it will be enough to live a few seasons and return to ash. No children to carry our names, no grief. Life will be a brief, hollow walk. My father won't lie still, though his legs are buried in trousers and socks. But where does all he knew, and all he must now know, walk? One last section from this poem. Probably he spun out of himself and landed squarely in that there, his new body capable, lean, vibrating at the speed of belief. She was probably waiting in the light everyone describes, gesturing for him to come. Surely they spent the whole first day together, walking past the city and out into the orchards where perfect figs and plums ripen without fear. They told us not to go tipping tables looking for them, not even to visit their bodies in the ground. They are sometimes maybe what calls out to people stuck in some impossible hell. The ones who later recall, I heard a voice saying, go. And finally, as if by magic, I was able simply to go. I have a daughter who's almost 3, and the little voice out there is reminding me of when she was very little. So I'll read a couple of poems that I wrote when I was, still pregnant and still trying to imagine what was going to happen. The first one, I watched a lot of videos of childbirth on YouTube, which is and isn't reassuring. So this is the poem that came out of that. It's called Sacrament. The women all sing when the pain is too much. But first, there is a deep, despairing silence. I don't know what rocks in them, what wants to knock them clear. Not just the child who knows only to obey. This something takes them from chatter to a silly dance, down to all fours begging to die. Then it drags them up by the hair, or lays them out flat and strikes them on the head. Then they see it, so bright it should be death, commanding now. And again, after a pause, now. Nothing else is there between it and them. It burns the air, singes sound. Their voices sink deep into themselves, down through flesh into the body's own hell. Sometimes it takes forever for that song only the animals know to climb back up into air as if to burst the throat. When your small form tumbled into me, I lay sprawled like a big game rug across the bed, belly down, legs wishbone wide. It was winter, workaday. Your father swung his feet to the floor. The kids upstairs dragged something back and forth on shrieking wheels. I was empty, blown through by whatever swells, swirling, and then breaks, night after night upon that room. You must have watched for what felt like forever, wanting to be what we passed back and forth between us like fire, wanting weight, desiring desire, dying to descend into flesh, fault, the brief ecstasy of being. From what dream of world did you wriggle free? What soared and what grieved when you aimed your will at the yes of my body, alive like that on the sheets. Now that my daughter is a toddler, I feel guilty for having ever shaken my fist at the neighbor's children upstairs running around and making all this noise. So I'll read this poem, which is maybe one of the last times I did that in earnest. The Universe as Primal Scream. 5 p.m. on the nose. They open their mouths and it rolls out, high, shrill, and metallic. First the boy, then his sister. Occasionally, they both let loose at once, and I think of putting on my shoes to go up and see whether it is merely an experiment their parents have been conducting upon the good crystal, which must surely lie shattered to dust on the floor. Maybe the mother is still proud of the 4 pink lungs she nursed to such might. Perhaps if they hit the magic decibel, the whole building will lift off and will ride to glory like Elijah. If this is it, if this is what their cries are cocked toward, let the sky pass from blue to red to molten gold to black. Let the heaven we inherit approach. Whether it is our dead in Old Testament robes, or a door opening onto the roiling infinity of space. Whether it will bend down to greet us like a father, or swallow us like a furnace. I'm ready to meet what refuses to let us keep anything for long, what teases us with blessings, bends us with grief. Wizard, thief, the great wind rushing to knock our mirrors to the floor, to sweep our short lives clean. How mean our racket seems beside it, my stereo on shuffle, the neighbor chopping onions through a wall. All of it just a hiccup against what may never come for us. And the kids upstairs still at it, screaming like the dawn of man, as if something they have no name for has begun to insist upon being born. I've stolen my title from one of my favorite pop musicians, David Bowie. So maybe I will close with a poem that is kind of an homage to him, Don't You Wonder Sometimes. After dark, stars glisten like ice, and the distance they span hides something elemental. Not God exactly, more like some thin-hipped, glittering Bowie being, a starman or cosmic ace, hovering, swaying, aching to make us see. And what would we do, you and I, if we could know for sure that someone was there squinting through the dust, saying nothing is lost, that everything lives on, waiting only to be wanted back badly enough? Would you go then, even for a few nights, into that other life where you and that first she loved, blind to the future once and happy? Would I put on my coat and return to the kitchen where my mother and father sit waiting, dinner keeping warm on the stove? Bowie will never die. Nothing will come for him in his sleep or charging through his veins, and he'll never grow old, just like the woman you lost, who will always be dark-haired and flush-faced, running toward an electronic screen that clocks the minutes, the miles left to go. Just like the life in which I'm forever a child, looking out my window at the night sky, thinking one day I'll touch the world with bare hands, even if it burns. He leaves no tracks, slips past quick as a cat. That's Bowie for you, the Pope of pop, coy as Christ. Like a play within a play, he's trademarked twice. The hours plink past like water from a window AC. We sweat it out, teach ourselves to wait. Silently, lazily, collapse happens, but not for Bowie. He cocks his head, grins that wicked grin. Time never stops, but does it end? And how many lives before takeoff, before we find ourselves beyond ourselves, all glam glow, all twinkle and gold? The future isn't what it used to be. Even Bowie thirsts for something good and cold. Jets blink across the sky like migratory souls. Bowie is among us, right here in New York City, in a baseball cap and expensive jeans, ducking into a deli, flashing all those teeth at the doorman on his way back up. Or he's hailing a taxi on Lafayette as the sky clouds over at dusk. He's in no rush, doesn't feel the way you'd think he feels, doesn't strut or gloat, tells jokes. I've lived here all these years and never seen him, like not knowing a comet from a shooting star. But I'll bet he burns bright, dragging a tail of white-hot matter the way some of us track tissue back from the toilet stall. He's got the whole world under his foot, and we are small alongside, though there are occasions when a man his size can meet your eyes for just a blip of time and send a thought like, shine, 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 straight to your mind. Bowie, I want to believe you, want to feel your will like the wind before rain, the kind everything simply obeys, swept up in that hypnotic dance, as if something with the power to do so had looked its way and said, go ahead. Thank you.
Your love for David Bowie, did that start early, or?
I guess so. One of the first, I remember watching, music videos in the 80s when I was in elementary school and kind of being fascinated by him. I know that wasn't his greatest era, but I was in my early 30s before I really discovered the glam period Bowie, and that's, I think, what really kind of socked me over the head and I don't know, maybe invited me to a different place in my imagination than I had known before.
Do you have any advice for young writers?
Sure. Well, I had lunch with some students yesterday, and I mentioned that, I think it was also in reference to the Bowie stuff in the book. There was a moment when I gave myself permission, or even more than that, I kind of gave myself the charge to allow everything that was important or interesting to me as a person into my poems. Because I think before that I was operating under this idea that I was supposed to be trying to make high art, and that poems were supposed to be, beautiful and lasting, thinking of questions of permanence in such a way that, they couldn't be silly, or they couldn't be interested in, small details of our everyday private lives. And it wasn't until after I started to bring those things in that I realized, A, that it's fun, and that the process of writing doesn't necessarily have to feel scary, like I'm impersonating someone who's smarter or more elegant than I am, and B, that there is something meaningful and powerful about our relationship with even the small aspects of the world. So that's something I would say. Okay.
Oh, I don't want to put you on the spot, but maybe I will. What do you think about in this kind of technological swirl that we're living in now, about what's going on with poetry just as an art form, and are you on Kindle, or where's all this migrating to?
Well, my relationship with poetry is probably about 70% analog, but I do utilize a lot of the internet access that, like the Poetry Society and the Academy of American Poetry and the Poetry Foundation have wonderful online archives that are very useful to me, in terms of my teaching or just in my normal life. If there's a voice that I want to hear, it's easy to Google it and have it come up in front of me. Or it's nice even to be able to send poems to people in that way. Yesterday, someone mentioned that there are poems that, there's a new trend of poems that are in text messages. So they're like 120 or 200 characters long, and it's an app that you can subscribe to on your phone. And I guess on one level, it's interesting to think that the zone that we're in when we're using our smartphones and we're kind of just moving through the world, getting things done, getting our access the way that we need it. It's nice to think that a poem can interrupt that, because I feel that the poem comes from a different part of our consciousness. I also feel like it would be a shame if that was the only relationship to poetry that a person has. But I guess it's unlikely that somebody who might be introduced to poems via text messages would stop there. So I guess it's great. I'm still learning.
When you're writing a poem, are you thinking about how the words are going to sound when you're actually speaking them?
Yeah, I am. I feel like even sometimes as I'm writing, I will read the poem out loud to hear what I've said. Sometimes hearing it audibly, just as a unit of sound, pushes me toward saying something that might not be logically related, but that teaches me something about the relationship between two disparate seeming things. I feel like I'm always moving between depths when I'm writing. So sometimes I'm writing from a place where I'm thinking about knowledge and ideas and logic, but that often will give way to something that's more, maybe visceral, and it'll be driven by sound for a little while, and then when that momentum runs out, maybe the image will be something that drives the poem forward. So Sydney mentioned last night that, it's, I think, really exhilarating to be writing not knowing where you're going to end up. And having committed to doing that, I'm always trying to listen for clues in what I've said that might lead me to the next thing that I ought to say.
Is your process for writing about your dad different than your process for writing about any other subjects?
That's a good question. I'm sure, on the most basic level, a lot of the poems that are for my dad in this book are in closed form or something like it. And I feel like that happened because I knew I wanted to kind of write toward him, but I didn't necessarily know what I needed to say. And so the form required me to say things in a certain way, and that was helpful. And often when I'm writing about other topics, I kind of start with something that I want to put down and move past. So yeah, I think it might have even been a matter of working in backwards in a way, starting from the shape.
I was noticing that certain themes kept coming up, like obedience and will in two of the poems that came up in a few of your poems. And I was just curious about what grips you about those ideas.
I wasn't even really aware that those things were. That's like your poems will tell your secrets, Be careful. Well, I think as a citizen, I am thinking about those things, right, and worried about the things that we're willing to just kind of like automatically obey or be informed by, and also thinking about where to put the energy that arises when resistance does become something that's desirable. But I was also writing about being a child, being a daughter, right, and growing through the stage of being obedient and into something that feels more like a self-driven being. It's also funny to me because when big things happen, we react, humans react in similar ways. I can't tell you how many times I've read the stages of grief, just, not only when people die, but when relationships die, and thinking, how long will it be before I get to the next stage? And how, it's not a choice, but there is something that we're obedient to, and maybe it's the nature of humanity, or maybe it's something that's like physiological, but it's fascinating to me, the things that we submit to because that's how we're built. So those are things that I was asking without even realizing it in the poems.
Do you think people are becoming, both poets and readers, more comfortable with writing in a genre, especially maybe the science fiction genre?
I guess so. The zombies are all over literature now, right? That shocks me in a way. I think that, for me, all I can really say is what genre sort of did for me, and I think this is one of the tools that it's used for, is it's a lens that allows us to look differently at the present moment and extrapolate from it, right? So with sci-fi, you're always imagining, if we keep doing what we're doing, what is the future that we are, setting into motion? And maybe those other genres are giving us the opportunity to look in different directions, inward or backward. I bet people have always been comfortable doing that. Maybe my interest in popular forms is something that coincides in terms of poetry with a lot of other people's, and maybe that's why we see more crossover in poetry. There was a question right there. Oh.
Do you feel like your relationship with your poems changes when you read them to a big lot of people?
Yeah. Well, the really important aspect of my relationship to the poems is over by the time I'm reading them to somebody. It's about when I'm writing them and what they're leading me to discover or ask. So by the time I'm reading them, it's almost like I'm, pushing my kid out to go do something independent. But I'm also, I find that when I read from my first book, for example, I hear different things in the poems than I used to hear, and I can maybe understand, also a lot of the things that I was writing about have come to a conclusion, the outcome I'm aware of now in a way that I wasn't, couldn't have been at the time. So that's interesting too.
A couple quick announcements. Tracy will be available after this presentation for signing out there if you want to talk to her then. And I want to thank Harbor Mountain Press again for having Tracy. And Tracy, thank you for being here.
Thank you.